already recording, so let's go. Scott Stevenson, welcome to LawNext.
Thanks for having me, Bob. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to talk to you. We are talking this week on the occasion of Spellbook having just announced a new product or a new feature called Spellbook Associate, which is you're talking about it as the first AI agent for law. I want to talk a lot more about that a little bit later. But before we get to any of that, I really wanted to talk a little bit more about the company and the history of the company and how it was that you guys came around to starting it in the first place. It wasn't even originally called Spellbook. I think it was called Rally Legal, right? Is that when it first started out?
You got it right. Yeah.
And that was about 2018 or so. So I mean, what was the story? Why did you even found this company in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So there's three co-founders. I myself came actually from an engineering background. My co-founder, Daniel, was the lawyer of the team. But I had a small business before this, and there was a day when I got a legal bill that took literally half the cash out of our bank account, and it was a little bit of a frustrating experience. I really needed that legal help. It was challenging to acquire it, and I had this realization of, still legal services aren't quite as accessible as I think they could or should be. So that was kind of my inspiration. Matt, one of my co-founders, also had kind of a small business and had that experience. And then Daniel was the lawyer of the team. So Daniel had this story that I heard then for the first time, and now I've heard many times, of going to law school, getting the student loans, graduating, becoming a junior associate, and then realizing what they have signed up for and like the immense drudgery of staying up until 10 p.m. and with 10 Word documents on the screen, copying and pasting between them. And, that for him was not what he envisioned being a lawyer was all about, and was a really very almost existentially disappointing experience for him. And so the three of us, had different frustrations and really wanted to find a way to make transactional law. In particular, we're focused on transactional law, business law, contracts, things of that nature.
Did you all know each other, or were you all friends or something? I mean, how did you even come together to tackle this issue?
Yeah, so Dan and Matt had actually gone through like a tech boot camp together. Matt did user experience. Dan was actually motivated to learn programming after he did law and realized what he was like, oh man, there must be a better way. I'm going to learn to program. He was that motivated to try to fix like what he saw as an issue in the practice of law. He went and learned programming. So they met through that. I actually met them. We actually in the early days kind of started similar companies without knowing each other. And then I was looking for a lawyer and a designer, and they were looking for an engineer. And we met, and actually one of our early investors, angel investors, kind of introduced us, say, hey, you guys are actually doing the same thing, and you're looking for the same complementary skill sets. So we came together that way, and it's been a lot of fun ever since.
What was, when you first got together and got started, what was your focus? What were you building at that point?
Yeah, we went through a lot of iterations. If you talk to
good lesson for startups, right?
Oh yeah, we went through a lot. A lot of people may not know this. We started as a company called Rally. We actually launched over 100 different landing pages and like different value props, different ways of trying to light up lawyers' eyes. In the early days, we actually worked out of a law office alongside the lawyers for like a couple of weeks, and like really got to intimately know their problems. A lot of our early solution was based around doc automation and templating. So that was where we originally started. This was before generative AI, and we had different takes on it, different twists. But doc automation is a category that's been around, I think, since late 70s or in the 80s. Academics were talking about this. So we were in that world for some time. We sold that solution to around 100 law firms, and it was going pretty well. But we never found that full inflection point until we had our generative AI moment and launched Spellbook.
So how did that come up? Well, first of all, I was going to mention, is Rally Legal even still a thing? Because there are still websites. You can still go to like rallylegal.com, I think. And
yeah.
Is that still a thing, or is it?
It is still a product. So we still have our doc automation product, Rally, that's out there used by actually quite a few firms. And I would say we're slowly integrating some of that into the overall Spellbook suite as well, although it's under 2 different brands now. Yeah. But yeah, it's a really interesting story how like, when we first went to raise money from investors, we got turned away. We actually, I think we probably had around 70 conversations with investors until we had our first kind of major financing round. And every investor was very afraid to invest in legal tech. They said, hey, we have battle scars. We've invested in too many legal tech companies, and we don't think lawyers are ready to adopt technology. We don't think they're, law firms are a good market to go after. We've seen people try to sell to these firms and fail multiple times. And that was the original. But we were like, no, there still has to be a way to get rid of this drudgery that lawyers are doing that they hate, or to dramatically reduce it. So we dug in, and I think we were a little naive with our doc automation solution. And what we didn't realize, and I was thinking like an engineer, is like, legal work is very bespoke. Contracts are very nuanced. They are really not super structured. They are more like prose, and every lawyer sees every deal as like this bespoke, unique moment, and the client has their unique circumstances. And the problem with a lot of the templating solutions we were delivering is that we're kind of forcing a lawyer to take what they consider kind of unstructured prose and to shove it into this very mechanical framework. And it would sound good on the surface, but when they went to use it, they would keep saying, you know what, this deal is too bespoke. This deal is too bespoke. And they would just say that over and over and never really fully adopt the tech. And then generative AI came along. And so we launched Spellbook's generative AI copilot. It was actually before ChatGPT. It was summer of 2022. I think we were the first one on the market, and our inspiration was not ChatGPT because it was before that. It was this tool called GitHub Copilot. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
So GitHub Copilot was like, I think the first generative AI application that really took off in like a meaningful way. And what it did for programmers like me is if I'm in there editing my code, it will suggest for me, what code might fit in next and what I might be able to insert next. And that was just like an amazing moment, because whatever bespoke code I was working on, whatever unique situation I had got myself into as a programmer, it would come up with a solution for me. And that was like a huge spark, aha moment for us. And we're like, oh, this is what lawyers need, because generative AI, in any bespoke moment, it can take unstructured text and output unstructured text. You don't need templates, and it can just work no matter what you're doing. And so
GitHub Copilot, the fact that GitHub Copilot was helping to guide you or suggest the code that you wanted to write was inspiration that this could help guide lawyers through the contract they wanted to write or the document they wanted to write, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So help them draft that clause that they need to add, or that modification they need to make to get a document in line with whatever deal they're trying to close. So that was a moment, and I think there's.
So you just kind of pivoted at that point and said, let's forget Rally, or we'll shelve Rally over here, and we're going to focus on this.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. We brought it to our board. We had a board and some investors at the point. And we said, hey, we have this other thing. We think it's going to be really cool. And they were kind of like, what are you talking about? This has nothing to do with anything that you've been talking about with us over the past year. Like, where did this come from? And then within like 3 months, we had a wait list of 30,000 lawyers, and every 30-minute slot on our sales team's calendar was booked. And then we brought that to the board, and we're like, hey, look what's happened. This is pretty wild. And they said, okay, yeah, maybe we should, pivot and change the name of the company. It was about a three-month window to kind of, and within 3 months, we had more revenue from the Spellbook Gen AI product than, the couple of years we had put into the doc automation product. So it was a pretty amazing moment. That's continued to accelerate to this day. It hasn't really stopped. So.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
and you were, I think you say you were the first Gen AI contract automation platform out there, or contract drafting platform. I'm not fact checking that. I'll take your word for it.
As far as we know,
pretty early. You were 2022 at some point, right?
Yeah, it was the summer of 2022 when we launched it. So
yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's very early on, and no one knew what ChatGPT. Like no one knew. Like when we were showing this to lawyers, they were like, "What is this? Like I've never seen anything like it." It was yeah, it was pretty interesting. But then after ChatGPT came out, it just accelerated even further because now lawyers were searching, "Oh, can I use ChatGPT with law? Like what is this new AI stuff?" So
yeah,
it
so
kind
that
of
was like
just
several months
compounded.
later, like November,
Yep.
what was it, October, November or something when ChatGPT came out
Yeah.
in 2022. And then
November, I think.
even then
Yeah.
there weren't really too many legal products using LLMs. I
No.
mean, they kind of maybe co-counsel was around at that point. Harvey was starting to be developed, not even
Yep.
that early, like in the fall that year.
Mhm. Yep.
So interesting.
You have a good memory. Yeah.
Well, only because I write about these things a lot.
Yeah.
But um, so, what for anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, saying, "Well, what the heck is Spellbook?" So, what the heck is Spellbook?
Yeah. So the way I would pitch it today is Spellbook is we aim to be the most comprehensive AI suite for transactional lawyers, and we sell both to law firms and in-house teams. There's really kind of four main things we do. One is contract review, so reviewing contracts, revising contracts, assessing them against your playbooks and things like that. That's a key feature. Drafting new language and clauses, either based on your library of clauses or using generative AI to match whatever you're working on, asking questions and getting answers that are based on actual data and references. And we also just launched a new tool called Benchmarks. So what Benchmarks does is if you're working on a contract or similar type of document, we'll actually benchmark it against the market and tell you, hey, here, maybe you have like 78% of the things that you would expect in a contract like this, and we will help you fill in those gaps in your agreement, or at least make you aware of them. And that's something that this whole idea of benchmarking against the market and understanding. Lawyers are always, debating what's market and what's not, and often there's no real data to point at. So we've been working on that problem as well. So and
And
the
is
thing
that
I'll say
what's
on top of
benchmarking also against a firm's own, if it has a
yep.
playbook or something like
Yeah,
that? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So a firm can also create their own custom benchmark or custom standard based on their own work, or their own golden precedent is something we'll often say. Um, and I think the other thing that's unique about Spellbook is we were born before ChatGPT, so we were not born in this world of kind of like chat tools. We started as an add-in in Word, so on top of your existing workflow. So we are there as a wind at your back, like an electric bicycle in your workflow, not like a separate tool that you go to and chat with or something like that.
Yeah, is it a chat interface, or is it? I mean, what is the interface? I mean, obviously we're on a audio podcast here, but I mean, what does it look like for lawyers working on it in Word?
Yeah, sure. Well, we do have kind of like the chat basics, like we call it
Yeah,
table stakes that you expect anywhere. You can
yeah,
ask questions, you can chat with it, you can ask it to draft you a clause. We do have that there, but I think what makes us unique is we have our review interface. What our review interface does is it lets you do a wide variety of different types of document reviews or revisions. Maybe you just want to change a document in a certain way, and we can highlight a number of risks or suggested changes that you should make to your document, ranked by severity. So if we see really highly severe issue in a contract, we can actually suggest a change that will mend that issue or bring it more in line with market. So and then we have playbooks on top of that, so you can have your own custom rules driving this thing. So that's sort of the review interface. And then we have the benchmark interface as well, which again is going to tell you more about gaps that it'll give you like a score of like how your contract compares to market, and tell you about gaps that you might be able to fill in and things like that. Yeah, there's other things I can go into, but yeah, it's a sidebar on Word and it has all of those things. And
why don't we, at this point, just turn to the news that you've announced this week and talk a little bit more about that, since it continues the discussion of the product and what it looks like. But as we're talking, you are just announcing the rollout of something called Spellbook Associate, which is an AI agent. And I know I happen to be looking at your LinkedIn profile earlier today, so I know it's been something you've been working on for a while and kind of teasing out there a little bit for a while. But so what is Spellbook Associate?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're super excited about it. We've been working very deeply on this for quite a while, and as a company, we try to be really, really far on the leading edge as far as we can get. And so, um, Spellbook Associate is what we would call a full-fledged AI agent product, and we believe it's the first one in law. And we define that as meaning four things. One, you can give it a project and it can plan out tasks that it has to do in order to complete that project. Two, it can actually go and execute things. So it can actually go open up Microsoft Word and go and revise a document. It can go and cross-reference two documents. It can actually go and do different things. Three, it can check over its own work. So it can look at what it's done so far and figure out if it has to fix something. And then four, it can adjust its plan. So just like a human, like no plan that we ever come up with actually works. And so the problem with like really early AI agents is they would kind of just be on rails. They'd come up with a plan and follow the plan and it wouldn't work. A really important part is being able to go back and correct that plan if things have gone off. And this might all sound very technical, but when you put all these things together, you basically get what is like an AI colleague where you can delegate an actual project to them with multiple documents and components, and it can break it down and complete that project and bring you back a set of deliverables and with a full paper trail of what it's done, and you can go and approve its work and so on. So this really, in our view, this unlocks like probably hundreds of new workflows. We don't know them all yet. We're leaning on our customers to try to figure out all the things that this thing can do. But any kind of project where you're dealing with multiple documents, multiple applications, and getting beyond kind of like the chat world where you put in the question, you get an answer, and that's about it, to something that's actually really working and digesting a project for you and getting you to higher quality outputs and more kind of impressive outputs. So that's what Spellbook Associate is all about.
And so you're a computer engineer. So describe what you mean by an AI agent.
Yeah, sure. So there's different definitions out there, but first I will lean on, again, agents are taking off over the past 6 months in the world of engineering. So similar with what happened with GitHub Copilot, when we saw that early on, we're like, oh, we should bring this to lawyers. This is happening again with agents. So again, for us, an AI agent has four components. It can plan, it can go and do work like editing documents, it can check over its work, and then it can replan or correct its plan when things go off the rails. Well, one reason I think this is really incredibly big moment is this is already taking off with software engineers in their own work. So I have been using agent tools. There are ones out there like Devin, GitHub Workspace, Cursor Composer. There's this whole set of new tools out there that engineers are using to do very similar types of work. What is a software engineer doing? They're editing multiple documents that are interconnected in all sorts of weird ways where you have to be really careful. And if you mess up one thing, it could blow up everything. Very similar to editing, a complex set of contracts. And so what you can do in that world is say we're working on Spellbook. I can say, hey, Spellbook needs a new login screen and it needs to have a login with Google button because we want to support login with Google. A software development agent can take that request, break it down and figure out exactly where it needs to make changes, which files it needs to make changes in. And then the amazing thing is it goes and tests its own code to verify that it actually made the right changes. And if it was wrong, it will go back and be like, oh, maybe I have to do something over here, just like a human works. And so it's all those things combined that to us makes a full-fledged agent product that is like an AI colleague that you're really delegating meaty projects to. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you give me a sort of maybe a tangible example of how somebody might use Spellbook Associate?
Yeah, sure. So an example I like from our world of startups and financings is say a venture capitalist is trying to execute a deal to invest in a company. There would typically be a term sheet, which is like the core terms or deal points for that deal. And once the term sheet is signed, you're going to prepare a set of definitive kind of documents, standard documents for that deal. Things like a share purchase agreement and so on. voting agreement, things like that. So something that we can do with Spellbook Associate, and there's a video on our site that you can check out at spellbook.legal/associate that you can see this example. And what it does is okay, cool, great. Yeah, you can give it a term sheet and say, hey, take this term sheet and update, these standard financing precedents with information that will make them match the term sheet. And so it will go and review the term sheet, actually make sure that it has everything and make sure that everything is there and it doesn't need clarification. Then it will go and edit, actually revise those documents to match up. And these aren't like templated documents like doc automation templated. These are just raw Word files. Go and find exactly where it needs to make all of these different changes, check over its work, and then kind of return you the files and say, hey, here you go. And then you have, say 4 or 5 or 6 Word documents with track changes on them, kind of like getting a project back almost from a junior associate saying, hey, here you go, take a look. And you still are in the driver's seat because you still have to, review those changes and accept them and make sure that they're correct and all those sorts of things. But it can get past that document drudgery stage in a financing transaction really quickly and without all the pain.
And where the precedents come from that it's working from? I mean, are you providing those or coming out of your own DMS or whatever, or how do those?
Yeah, in this case, you would be providing them, I would say. And this is something I talk about a bit. We do have the ability to draft documents totally from scratch as well. But I think generally the way lawyers work is they work off known precedents and trusted precedents that they know inside out. So that's typically how we would recommend using a tool like this, is still give it access to the precedents you like, because then it will be much easier to review its work. Whereas you could ask it to draft from scratch, but then you're going to have way more to review, and you're not going to be as comfortable with the output.
So you mentioned a little while ago that it can actually, among the steps it can perform is to actually check its own work, and obviously, lawyers are going to be concerned about possibly delegating the checking of the work to an AI agent. I mean, what am I trying to say? How can lawyers using this ensure that at each step of the way, what the AI agent is doing, what Spellbook Associate is doing, is the correct thing? What controls or oversight do they have over this?
Yeah, so a couple things. So today we have both an interactive mode and more of an autopilot mode. In the interactive mode, you're actually accepting everything as it does it. So it's actually, and you probably saw this in our demo, it's actually pulling up Word, and you're actually accepting every change as it's proposed, basically. So that keeps you ultra in the driver's seat. The other way is you get back the Word documents, and there's track changes on it, and you go through and accept it just like you would in any Word document. Which is not so different as interacting with like a year 1 associate. One thing I would say, even though it can check its own work, it's like to the extent that a year 1 associate can check its own work, it's still very much on the more senior lawyer to do their work to ensure that the work product is actually good and solid. So we're not saying it goes that far whatsoever. We're just saying it can get you to like a pretty good first draft. In the same way, a pretty inexperienced associate might, especially on a lot of the drudgery types of work.
Yeah. The trust but verify aspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a good way to
watch the video, and I mean, there's several stages where it creates a summary, and then it asks if it should proceed, and you can look at the summary prepared and indicate whether it should proceed, and then it goes to the next step and asks again if it should proceed. So that's kind of what you're describing there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's another thing. It will interject and be like, yeah, does my plan look okay? And you can say, no, actually, it doesn't look okay. I want you to do this instead. So it does interject with the plan. You can confirm the plan, change the plan as it's going. And then the other thing we have is this that we spend a lot of time on. And this, whenever I say this, people, their eyes glaze over and they're like, that doesn't sound very important. But I think you'll see that it is when you try this kind of tech, is the ability to rewind. Like we have version control built into everything it does so that you can rewind back to any previous point. And this is what all the software tools do as well. Like when I go and send off my AI software engineer to do some work for me, sometimes it does end up confused, maybe because I gave it a bad instruction, which is like, that happens in management too. Sometimes you give a junior associate a bad instruction and they end up down some deep rabbit hole that they shouldn't be. The cool thing in Spellbook Associate is if that happens, you literally just rewind back to a point that you like and you can start from there. And I think that's something that also, I think it's hard to explain over the podcast, like why that's so important. But I think when people try these tools, they'll see that ability to just rewind back to any point and to have that full paper trail of everything is like, gives you a lot of peace of mind and a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that kind of ever since you've transitioned to Spellbook, lawyers have been lining up down the street wanting to get in and buy it. Who are the lawyers? Who is this product for? What's the audience?
Yeah.
Are you serving lawyers in all size firms or particular size firms or corporate legal?
Yep. So we have over 2,500 paying customers now, and law firms of all sizes, in-house teams, government agencies, so across the board. But I will say we have a deep focus on law firms. So probably 80% of our customers are law firms today. And I would say mid-size and small firms are probably our bread and butter, though we have some much larger firms on board as well. And I think, we've, kind of uniquely positioned our product to work really well in that world. Now, we have in-house teams using us lots as well, especially like they love like the playbook kind of feature. But I think we're uniquely positioned for law firms, especially those mid-sized and small firms.
Yeah, if you're in that mid-sized and small market, do you continue to keep this focus on transactional and commercial documents, or do you see yourself at some point as expanding beyond that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a lot to do in that world still, and I think by staying laser focused on that, we can just build a better product and be the best at that. We really want to be the best at something. We don't need to be the best at everything out there. There's a lot of great other companies who have different focuses. So I'm not saying we won't go into, say litigation, for instance, but we see a lot of work to do to just build the best product for transactional lawyers right now. And I don't see ourselves getting close to the end of that initial mission.
Yeah. You, again, earlier in our conversation, you talked about back in the rally days, one of the things you discovered was kind of the difficulty of getting lawyers to adopt document automation and probably other kinds of legal technology software. Has Gen AI changed that adoption curve?
It is complete night and day change, and we have been on both sides of it. We spent a solid couple years selling doc automation to law firms, and then, like I said, within 3 months we had more customers coming for our Gen AI solution than we had in the past 2 years with our doc auto solution. So, complete change of mind. And for me, as an engineer, it was a really I think what's the word? Really special moment for lawyers to say actually they were right the whole time. Like, I think there was this sort of tension between technologists and law firms and the investors who invest in the tech companies that like, these lawyers, like, they don't want to adopt technology, like they're so stuck in their ways, and why aren't they adopting our template tool? And even I as an engineer was sometimes guilty of being like, they don't get it, what's going on. But no, they did get it. They did get it, because as soon as something came around that actually helped them, that actually could fit into their workflow and how their bespoke deals, they adopted it faster, I think, than maybe any other industry out there. I don't know all the stats on the other industries, but I think lawyers have adopted Gen AI, as fast as any other industry, if not faster. So this whole narrative that there was, like, lawyers don't want to change their ways, was really wrong. I think, because it's just that the tools didn't help them that much. And I think technologists like me just had a very idealistic vision of how legal work should be done that was wrong. Contracts are amorphous, they're nebulous, they're intentionally left that way. They aren't supposed to be these perfectly constructed, templated things. Every deal is unique, every client is unique, and lawyers were just waiting for a tool that could actually accept that reality rather than trying to pigeonhole them into this world of really rigid templating. So it's a cool thing to watch, and important moment for lawyers, that they
It,
were kind of right, I think, a lot of this
it,
time.
well, it's interesting because I mean, you're saying they were right, but it's like whatever the old Henry Ford quote that apparently he never actually said about if I listen to my customers, I'd build a faster horse or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
Lawyers, you launched Spellbook at a time when probably the vast majority of lawyers had no idea what generative AI is. There's still a whole lot of
No.
lawyers who have really don't really understand anything about generative AI. So how do you, as product developers, um, you know, internally, sort of what's the process of how you figure out what's the right product for that market, given the market may not fully understand what the possibilities are from the products you're building?
Yeah, you're touching on something that is like a really, really unique challenge, I think, for anyone building this sort of AI stuff, because no customer knows what's possible or can even really envision. It's even hard for us to envision the possibilities, so it's even harder for our customers. So yeah, it is a unique challenge, and you definitely can't, understanding our customers is really important. Understanding their pains deeply and like really understanding them. Like when they come back to you and they say, "Hey, that doesn't work in my workflow." Sometimes you have to be willing to accept that and willing to really think about why. But customers generally will not tell you exactly what to build because they don't know what's possible. We don't even know what's possible. So we do take more of like an Apple approach, and Apple, keeps things in the lab for a while and uses a lot of it. They understand their customers, but they aren't necessarily asking their customers for the exact right product idea. When they built something like the iPhone, like no customer was asking for that. So we just have to gather as much information and understand our customers as deeply as possible, and then use our intuition to find these opportunities, these really expansive opportunities. And yeah, no customer was asking us for an agent, but they were asking for us, hey, how can I use AI on these multi-document packages? I'm working on like 20 documents, and Spellbook doesn't really help me with that today. So there's all sorts of little signals in there that you gather. And then I do think this whole thing of just like pattern matching against what's happening in other industries, like, okay, here's what's working for software engineers. Can we steal any of that and bring that to lawyers? I think that's been a really powerful way that we have come up with a lot of our ideas too. And I think engineers and lawyers, actually, there's a lot of similarities in the work that there's a mirroring that happens there as well that has helped us get inspired and come up with ideas. Then when we launch something, what we're looking for when we show something to lawyers, we call it's almost like you're looking for a physiological reaction of like their pupils are dilating, they're leaning in, and it's like you almost see their life is flashing before their eyes, and they're seeing like, oh my gosh, like this part of my work that I hate is about to go away, and the way I work is going to change forever after I adopt this. We're looking for that magnitude of a response when we're showing something to users. Because every user will always say, when you show them the software, they'll be like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. Everyone, oh, that's great. Everyone will always say that. But what you're looking for is like this physiological reaction, like, holy cow, my work is going to change substantially for a long time. And we don't really stop until we are able to get that reaction from like a set of customers.
Be careful, or your co-founder Daniel is going to go back to law practice again. You're going to make it so enjoyable for him.
Yeah. Well, that's our goal. That's the whole goal at the end of the day. Get Dan back to law.
Get Dan back to law.
Yeah.
Get him a real job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's kind of what's ahead? What else should we expect to see coming down the pike from you guys?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things we're working on. I think this Spellbook Associate is going to be a really interesting story to follow. I think we are going to be leaning on our customers a lot to understand which use cases does it work well for, which does it not work so well for, and figure out over time how to give it new skills and capabilities and guardrails to be better. So I think like that's especially over the next 3 months, we're just going to be digesting like a fire hose of information and putting out like new demos, new use cases. So I'm like super excited to finally be at a point where we're going to just be iterating more in public and being able to show more in public with this thing and improve it over time. So yeah, that's probably like the biggest thing on our radar right now. But we're continuing to improve all parts of like the Spellbook product. Really excited about the benchmarking feature that I mentioned earlier as well, of enabling lawyers to have better answer to like the what is market question. And we would like to get to a point eventually where we can answer questions like, what's the average price per square foot in a New York City commercial lease in Q3 2024, and to use that to inform contract reviews and things like that. So that's something else that we've been working pretty deeply on.
Yeah, there are some other benchmarking products out there in the market. There are clearly some other Gen AI contract review and generation products out there in the market. So when people come to talk to you, and I'm sure they ask, how are you different? How do you distinguish yourself from others out there? What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, it usually depends on exactly what they're looking for. I think there's a lot of differences we have in our tool. One thing I'll say is we've really designed our tool for actual engagement. So I don't argue with them. We actually don't even do sales calls most of the time. We just do onboarding calls, and we say, you know what, we're going to set you up. You're going to try it. Let us know what you think in a week, and then that's usually what we do, because it's everything in that user experience that makes it a product that's easy to kind of adjust your habits around. I think we've put a lot of thought into how do we make this seamless to adopt? Because I think that's really important for lawyers. They're so busy. They're jumping between so many different deals and matters and documents. So I think we just have a really solid user experience that fits on top of their existing workflow. And that is, one of the things that we just give it to them, and we don't even do a sales meeting. We just do an onboarding meeting and let the product kind of speak for itself.
Take them for give them a test drive, and then they buy the car.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we've been iterating. Like I think we probably also launched the first generative AI redlining tool. We launched this early last year, and the other thing is it will actually mark up your doc. It's not just going to give you a list of issues. It is trying to come up with precise red lines to solve whatever problems that you have in the document, and can insert them using track changes. So I think the level of precision with it is really helpful. I think the playbook aspect is really helpful. We're launching a new version of our playbooks soon as well, which is going to have some cool new features. I think we've also this whole agent approach that I talked to you about earlier, we've also integrated some of that into our contract reviews. So if you take a contract and put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, tell me what's wrong with this contract, it'll give you this bullet point list of there's 10 things maybe wrong with it. And It's kind of, it doesn't feel very trustworthy. It doesn't feel very grounded. And it can sometimes unearth issues, but it doesn't work well with long contracts and things like that. Again, we also use this sort of agent approach in our reviews now, and this is new, and we've kind of shipped this behind the scenes because the announcement on the broader agent thing just happened. But now, rather than that, our review agent can think through a document and actually cross-reference sections and be like, oh, I read this over here, and then I read this on page 20, and then I read this on page 40, and those things don't match up. It's able to come up with issues of that level of sort of detail now because of the agent approach. And so I think just in terms of overall user satisfaction with our suggestions, we tend to be really good.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about is just fundraising. I mean, you said earlier it was hard in your early days to get anybody to even talk to you about fundraising. What'd you say, 80 different calls or whatever it was before you finally got a deal? This year you raised another $20 million, and I think it was 10 originally, so you're up around 30 plus in terms of a raise. Do you see yourself, I mean, at this point, they're probably knocking at your door instead of you chasing after them. But do you see yourself as wanting to raise more money at this point, or what are you doing on that front?
Yeah, so it definitely is night and day again. VCs did not like legal tech for a very long time, and now it is a very hot space. We get reached out to probably multiple times per week now from folks who are interested in hearing about what's going on. Not just, and they're VCs are, I think, investors are generally very, very interested in the space and what's happening, and they see the metrics. And I think what what often brings them to us is the amount of usage and engagement they see from talking with lawyers and law firms, and like how often it's being used. And that's what we raised our last round on was, yeah, we had really good revenue growth, but the usage and engagement and how like lawyers use, our average lawyer uses this like 60 times per month right now, which, that kind of usage is what has, I think, really real demand, and other products are getting that kind of usage too. Yeah, it's totally changed. We're talking to investors lots. We're pretty well capitalized and growing revenue really quickly right now. We'll probably think about a raise at some point in the future. It's always a decision you're thinking about every quarter. But at this point, we're like really well capitalized. Revenue's growing quite well. We've grown around 5x in revenue over the past year. The time will come when we take that next capital injection, but not necessary right now.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I've been peppering you with questions for the last 40 minutes. Is there anything that you'd like to say or talk about that I haven't asked you about?
I think that about covers it, Bob. I think one thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is like I think this agent buzzword. It's when people hear it, sometimes they're like, oh, it's like this other AI buzzword. Oh, great! Now I have to learn this. Does it mean anything? People are throwing it out there, and it is very much like the first Gen AI wave, where everyone was saying GPT-3, and what does this mean? And sometimes it meant something, sometimes it didn't. But I would say that amongst the confusion and like the smoke and mirrors, there is something very, very deeply real in there, which to me comes down to that ability to plan, ability to execute actual tasks, ability to evaluate your own work, or for the AI to evaluate its own work, and the ability to adjust the plan. And that is a real thing that is really taking off in other verticals or other industries like the software development industry. And so I think there's sometimes like this knee-jerk reaction with these words. Like I have it too, is like, does this mean anything? Where the word's not well defined yet. I would say to people to like give it a little pause and do a little investigation. Like, yes, there is a lot of BS out there, and a lot of that word probably being used in ways that is not really helpful or productive and not very meaningful. But there is also something very real happening, and there's already like empirical evidence of this changing how work is done in another industry. And I think this moment of like confusion about like what is an agent, does it mean anything, is also indicative that something is happening. Like that's what it felt like, when GPT-2 and GPT-3 were coming around. You would hear these words bouncing around, and no one could really say what it meant or if it was important or not. I think these words the word agent will become more well defined. It will mean something. And personally, I would make a bet, here on the record, that agents will probably end up being more impactful than like what ChatGPT was 2 years ago. I think it's because you're going from getting one answer to your question to now having essentially an AI colleague who's going and working on projects for you. And it's not just our company. I think it's going to impact everything in a really interesting way.
Yeah, and you're certainly not alone in saying that. And I'm probably one of those people struggling with the concept to some extent. I tend to think of it almost in an oversimplified way as almost, whereas ChatGPT is a sort of call and response kind of an engagement, an agent becomes almost like an executable against that call and response, where you can, as you say, a series of tasks, get it to do a series, execute a series of whatever it might be in order to take you to an end that's farther along than just getting information back out of the chat.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting way to think of it, and definitely echoes. I think like another interesting way to think of it is like ChatGPT is like if I put a microphone up to your mouth and I'm like, Bob, I need you to output an employment agreement right now, and you have to do it. You can't read any references, and and then you just start speaking, And agents are more like, okay, hang on, before I answer the question, let me go look up some information. Let me go cross-reference some things. Let me go copy and paste. Let me actually, rather than just kind of being on the spot with the mic and saying a bunch of stuff that may or may not make sense, I'm actually going to learn to do actions in the world and combine information from many places and get you kind of a much better response. So yeah,
sounds like what lawyers do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, Scott, really
Cool.
appreciate talking to you. It's been fun to talk to you, and congratulations on this launch, and congratulations on all your success.
Thank you, Bob. It was great to chat with you as well.
All right.